Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is season 2, I guess. We're going to be posting weekly, so stay tuned. I'll post clips on the Instagram. Follow the Instagram if you don't. It's called Uniting Narratives. Yes, there was a name change. And yes, Spencer is not doing the podcast with us anymore. He transferred to go play baseball at Belmont Academy, and we're super excited for him. So hopefully this episode is interesting. Follow the Instagram. That's all I got. Let's go. Professor Dobski, thank you for coming onto my podcast as a guest. The podcast is called Uniting Narratives. This is going to be the first episode after our hiatus this summer. I took the summer off, and I have a new vision. We lost Spencer, which I talked about on the social media, but we didn't lose him. He's still with us. He's playing baseball down south, and he's pursuing his dreams, and we love that. So thank you for coming on here. How do you feel?
Yes, I feel great. It's my pleasure. I'm honored to be invited. Happy to be here, and I feel great. I mean, it's the start of a new semester. I've got a great schedule this year. I teach Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, which means when there's a Monday holiday, that's why. By the way, for those of you who are watching this, you're going to see me not in a suit and tie for one of the first time ever on campus. I try and make sure I look professional and take my job seriously. But today I'm dressing down.
It's a casual atmosphere here.
So I'm feeling good. The weather finally showed up. Yeah. Right. The summer's been so cold and wet. Right. Finally showed up. I love the heat. Students have been bemoaning the heat because apparently the dorm rooms are not sufficiently air conditioned. No. But I
if you're an alumni, you know.
No, the hotter, the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Really? Yeah. You ever take your class outside?
I do. I have. I did. For years now. I've been here almost 20 years. I came here in 2003, so exactly 20 years. And maybe for the first 15, I never took them outside. But maybe in my old age, I'm just getting lax. But now that we've got that nice little setup out in the plaza outside of TFAC, there's a place where you can actually have a kind of class, and it's not too bad. So on occasion, really nice days, I'll take them outside. But
very cool.
Yeah.
So one of the goals of the podcast is to interview professors from different disciplines, students from different disciplines as well. Mm-hmm. So it's important to go over, I think, your background and why you became a professor, and then why specifically a political scientist.
Yeah, so it kind of worked backwards. When oddly enough, my family is very, very politically active. I grew up in South Bend, Indiana, and my father, my grandfather, my aunts and uncles were, the extended family were all deeply, deeply involved in local politics. Which meant, I was the youngest of 4 kids, which meant I kind of got dragged to every event that my parents were involved in, either actively themselves or supporting one of the family members. And it drove me nuts, and I swore to myself I was never, ever going to get involved in politics, because I got to see it up close and personal. I just didn't want to have anything to do with it. So when I went to college, I went to Boston College as an undergrad. I wanted to pursue philosophy. And because it was the questions about how to live that really were moving me. And when I got to BC, the first class I took on philosophy, I can't remember the professor's name now, and even if I could, I probably wouldn't say it, but it was on epistemology. And I dropped that so fast. Because look, and now you talk to me. Yeah, epistemology is very important. I love reading about it and studying it and thinking about it. But as an 18-year-old young man, what I was driven by was how should I live my life, not what is the study of knowledge and how do we know what we know when we know it. I just couldn't be bothered with that at the time. I wanted to know what is justice, what is happiness, are they the same, are they at odds with each other? So that was what was moving me. And so for like the first 2 years at Boston College, I kind of floated around. I tried everything. I explored every possible outlet that I thought would address these concerns. Just so happened I was also interested in taking ancient Greek. That's a much longer, weirder story, but I was studying ancient Greek, and there were a lot of grad students. Boston College has a great political science department, and they have a great graduate department, and a lot of the aspiring PhDs in the grad department were studying Greek because they were working on Plato, they were working on Aristotle, they were working on Homer, so they had to know the Greek. And so I was taking these, intro level Greek classes with them, and then involved in study groups with them. And after working on the 6 principal parts of the Greek verbs with them, we would just start shooting the breeze, and the questions that moved me would come up, and they would say, you really should study politics. And I was like, come on, no. And I resisted as long as I could, and then I finally took a class very late in my career. I mean, I didn't start studying politics until my junior year, really, and I held off declaring as long as the registrar would allow me. And I took one class with Chris Brule on Plato's Republic, and it just blew my mind.
Was it the first time you encountered that text?
Yeah.
The Republic? Okay.
Yeah. And in fact, I remember very clearly the first class day of my junior year in that class. And I walked out of there like my head was on fire. And I said, I've got to do this. So the next 2 years, it just became all about studying political philosophy. And so because I had already satisfied all my core, it was political science all the time. And it was fantastic. And so what happened was I was driven more by the subject matter, and I really wanted to continue an engagement with the subject matter. And so it was kind of like, well, what is the one job out there that would allow me to continue to study this, to think about it and write about it and talk to other people about it. This is what really gets me excited. And is there another job out there like this? And it turns out there is, and it's this. Right. So so there was never a moment where I was like, I want to be a professor because being a professor is what I want to be. It's no, I want to study these things. What's the vocation that will allow me?
What's
to
practical
do that?
in the world? Right.
Yeah. Well, just how can I do it? Right. Who's going to pay me to do this? Who's going to pay me to talk about the Republic? Who's going to pay me to talk about Thucydides or Shakespeare? Or we were talking earlier today about communist regimes and political mass murder. Who's going to pay me to talk about these things, right? And now they don't pay me a lot, right? But they do pay me to do this, and that really was it. I suppose it was fitting. I don't know how long you want me to go on about this, but when I was born and raised in South Bend, Indiana, and my mother was running a pre-K out of the back of her house. This was back in the 70s. And so I was literally born into a classroom, and I was there as an infant. She had me there as an infant. So with the exception of maybe like I don't know, maybe a couple months after graduation, I've never been outside of a classroom. So I suppose I should have known all along that I was going to be a professor because I was just kind of born into it. But so that's how I got into it. Cool. It was just this is what I love doing, and I would do it for nearly free. Right. And it turns out I do. I'm just kidding.
So why Assumption? Why Worcester? Was it just
chance, it really was chance. At the time, so I had gotten married in, let's see if I can get this right, 2001. My wife at the time was pregnant with twin girls, and I was wrapping up my dissertation. We were living in New York City, and I was wrapping up my dissertation, and out of nowhere, an opening at Assumption, came across my way, and I won't take you through the ins and outs of it, but I said to her, this was about a month before the fall semester started in 2003, and I said this could be my opportunity to land a tenure track gig. It's a sign of the times in the academy that someone who writes on Thucydides is not someone who's generally sought after in political science. But Assumption's political science department was really unique. They are really kind of grounded in a much older study of politics, and a kind of study of politics not as we've known it for the last, 60, 70, 80 years in the West, but grounded in kind of Aristotle's approach to the study of politics, a much older and venerable tradition. And when you have a department that's animated by, takes Aristotle as their pole star for the proper approach to the study of politics, well, then someone like me who writes on Thucydides, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with
Not
Thucydides,
familiar,
but Thucydides was an ancient Greek. He was an Athenian, lived in the 5th century BC, and we know of Thucydides because he wrote this work that we call today the History of the Peloponnesian War. And it's this massive, massive work, 500 pages of Greek, and it's about the war between Athens and Sparta, 27-year war between Athens and Sparta. Well, someone who writes their dissertation on that at a place like Assumption's Political Science Department is a perfect fit for teaching international relations. And nowhere else in America, or very few other places in America, would think that's appropriate or acceptable, which I think is sad and unfortunate. But anyway, so that's kind of why.
Right.
Kind of why Assumption. And we were also at that time looking, as I say, we were living in New York City. My wife at the time was pregnant with twins, and so we were very much interested in leaving the city since we were about to have 2 very small children on our hands. So it was very nearly providential.
So your children are older now. They go
Yeah,
to school,
yeah, they're juniors at Providence College.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
That's
twin
another
girls.
Catholic
Another
liberal
Catholic
arts,
school.
or
Yeah,
is it-
Catholic. Yeah, they're Catholic liberal arts.
Very
It's
cool.
it's about twice the size of Assumption, right? So they've got around 4,000 undergrad, but a really serious school, right? Takes liberal education very seriously, very deliberate about it. Everyone's on board there. It's really impressive. I took my daughters there, and they weren't necessarily. I mean, they liked the school. Wasn't their first choice. Now they love it. They're delighted they're there. But what impressed me the most was when we went for. I don't know, it was one of these prospective student days, and you kind of sit in this massive auditorium, and they play a video for you, and the pitch for liberal education on the video is given by the dean of this business school, and it was one of the best pitches for liberal education I've ever heard, and I've given many pitches for liberal
Wow.
education. I think
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at it, and this person knocked it out of the park. And I said, if the dean of the business school can pitch liberal education like that, everyone here is on board, very
that's right.
nearly so. And so the whole school is really kind of cohesive educationally. And
That's awesome.
yeah, and they've got a great Western Civ program, and yeah, so my daughters are very happy there.
That's great. You mentioned, so you're at BC, and it seems like you weren't really anxious. I mean, maybe you were anxious about choosing what to do, but you took your time. And the first time I met you, we met at the honors dinner. I was
remember
I was a
this.
first year student.
Yeah.
Now I'm a junior, of course. And it's funny because my friends Matt and Ashley were sitting at that table. I ended up becoming great friends with them because I study abroad with them the next year. But it's besides the point. I more remember you being there, and you were asking everybody what their major was. And then you'd ask why, and when it got to me, I said, majoring in finance. You said, why? I'm like, I don't know. I don't really like finance. And you were just like, don't major in it. And I was like, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, right.
So that was a serious conversation, and I ended up thinking about what I liked, and I liked philosophy.
Well,
I thought
there
that the classes were good, and I figured it was encouraging reading and writing skills, which seems like a lot of people may not have anymore, or are losing. And what advice do you give to students who are really anxious as a freshman, who want to just get something in, lock something in, and not worry about it? And then think about how many do that.
Yeah, so we kind of perfect that you asked that, because this Constitution Day, which is September 17th, but September 18th, we're celebrating Constitution Day here at Assumption University, and one of the guests we've invited this year is Stephen Smith from Yale. And Stephen Smith has this wonderful piece, a short piece called Majoring in Fear. And it's about how young people and their parents, right, bring their kids when they're school shopping, right? They go to prospective student days, and they're really terrified about what's going to happen after I graduate. Will this education be worth all of the time and money we're sinking into this? We really want an ROI, and the parents are very much concerned that their kid is going to graduate and not just go back home and live in their basement and be the best educated barista at Starbucks or something like that. No offense to Starbucks baristas, we need them, especially when I've got to wait 25 minutes at a Starbucks just to order a dark roast or something. But in all seriousness, I mean, what parents want most of all is for their children to be happy, right? If you ask them and give them more than 30 seconds to think about it, they want their children to be happy. But kids are terrified about the next step. what's going to happen when I leave here and I'm on my own, right? What the future holds is unknown. And I encourage students to really lean into that. Yeah, it's unknown. In fact, I don't expect you as 18-year-old freshman or a 22-year-old senior to know what you're going to do with the rest of your life. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do when I was an undergraduate, that is, study political philosophy and talk to people about it. But most people aren't like that, and in fact, they're going to graduate. They're going to pursue a particular vocation. There's going to be twists and turns, and it's going to be. In fact, studies show there are several twists and turns that people take in their professional lives before they kind of find where they want to be and where they're supposed to be, where they're happiest or most satisfied. And that's the general run of things, right? And so what I tell students is, you can't game plan the future. There's going to be all sorts of things that are coming your way. You're not going to be able to foresee. It's a fool's game to think that, hey, I know I'm going to be, at 18 years old, I know 20 years out, I'm going to be here X. Right. Well, you don't. Nobody knows that, right? I knew I wanted to study political philosophy, but I didn't know I was going to get a job. I'd have all sorts of plan B, plan C, plan D, right? I didn't know I was going to be at Assumption. I didn't know I was going to be at Worcester. Sure. In Worcester. So you simply can't game plan the future. So what I tell the students right now is, look, you study what you love. Study what you love. If we're doing our job here at Assumption, in whatever field you decide, hey, I love X, whatever it is. If it's finance, great. If it's philosophy, beautiful. If it's chemistry, X, whatever it is you love, we should, if we're doing our jobs correctly, give you the skills that you need to succeed at any vocation you find yourself in. Right? This is going to be true of about 99% of the jobs that are out there, the lines of work that are out there. So study what you love now while you can. Right. Because when you leave here and you're at a job, right? And maybe you're in the private sector, and your boss is going to be saying, I need X on my desk by 5 p.m. today, and you say, well, I've got these questions about these murderous regimes in the 20th century, and your boss is like, I don't care, right? I don't want to talk about that right now.
Right now we can choose, but when push comes to shove and you actually need financial support, you can't choose necessarily.
Right. Well, your choices, you're gonna have a menu of choices that are dictated largely by things other than what you might want to do.
That's right. Okay.
Right. Sometimes you'll have. I mean, we shouldn't say there's going to be no choice or no freedom, right? But not always, right? And again, we don't. So one of the Professor Wiener, well, now President Wiener, likes to remind people along these lines. He'd say, there are all these people who said, I'm going to be a Sovietologist. back in the 80s. I'm gonna know and study and be an expert in Soviet politics. Yep. 1987. This is great. Well, 2.5 years later, where'd the Soviet regime go?
That's right.
Gone, right? No one was talking about terrorism on September 10th, 2001 as being our primary foreign policy challenge, And then the next day, everything changes, right? 2008, housing bubble goes, right? Who was thinking about that then, right? So these things are always going to be changing. While you're here, you got 4 years surrounded by professionals who've dedicated their lives at knowing certain things very, very, very well. You have this glorious opportunity and freedom galore. I know students think I'm so busy, and I get it. I've been there. I know what it's like being a student. You feel like you're the busiest person ever. But just wait. Wait. You get out, you graduate, you have a job, you have kids, you have a spouse, you have a house. Things get really busy. This is a glorious time of freedom and opportunity. It's luxurious. It's leisure. The Greek word for leisure is skole, school. All right, our word for school comes from the Greek word skole, which is leisure. Right? School should be leisurely in the sense that it's serious, but it's also pleasant, right? It's inherently pleasant. So you have this wonderful opportunity. Study what you love, man. Don't major in fear. Major in what you love.
Why do you think we lose, we lose the view that this is so pleasurable and fun and exciting, and we're young, so we have our bodies, but we also are growing into our intellectual capabilities.
Yeah.
Where do you think is it just a lack of grateful lessons that we're taught, or how to?
Yeah, I mean, this is one thing. So it's you and I were talking about podcasts, right? Recently, just before we got on here, and one of the podcasts we were talking about had a guest on who's part of setting up the University of Texas at Austin, a new a new college, right? They're trying to kind of create to work against certain trends within the within higher education in America. Anyway, what Jacob Howland was talking about, their guest, he was saying, you'll notice a lot of students have lost a sense of the joy of just learning for its own sake, and I think that's partly due to the fact that it's become so utterly commodified, right? Everything is about you're doing this for some other reason. This is to get a job, right? Everything around us when it comes to education kind of pulses with one message. It's about a job. It's about a job. It's about a job. It's utterly instrumental, right? And it should be partly that. I mean, let's be serious, right? I mean, obviously, I want students to come here. I want them to acquire all sorts of wonderful pre-professional skills that will allow them to go out there and make a ton of money so they can give it back to Assumption University and endow Professor Dobski with a wonderful chair, right? I'd love for that to happen. But first and foremost, right, there should be something that is just, education should be for its own sake. In my Quest for Justice class, I'll talk to students about this. We'll read this wonderful essay by W.E.B. Du Bois, black author from the early 20th century, wrote this beautiful book called The Souls of Black Folk. There's this essay called The Talented Tenth, and in The Talented Tenth, he says, that the true object of education is not to make men carpenters, but carpenters men. Right? The true object of education is not to simply give you job skills that allow you to keep, food on the table and a roof over your head, although it should also do that. It's to make you into a fuller, more complete human being, which means initiating you into the mysteries of humanity, which introduces you to the joys and the tragedies and the triumphs of human life. Right. And that's a different kind of education. And one, when I say it out loud to young people and parents, sometimes it's like I'm speaking Sanskrit or Chinese because they just haven't heard it. The parents, though, after a few minutes of this, will start to light up because they'll remember that this was a possibility once, and that there is a joy to learning things, whatever the subject is, right? It doesn't have to just be Shakespeare or, political philosophy or whatever. I mean, whatever the soul takes to. And students have just not heard this enough. And here's the other thing. I mean, it's from elementary school all the way up through the time they graduate. They're hearing it from their peers. They're hearing it from the media. And they all too often hear it from other professors. It boggles the mind.
Yeah.
Education, yes, it should help you get a job. It should help you succeed at that job. But, what's the line that Professor Guerra put up for C-Tech? Right? It's about not just earning a living, but having a life, or making a living, but having a life. Absolutely. That's the point. Not to just make you into carpenters, but into human beings.
Mm-hmm. And on a younger scale than college, the high school teachers, I'm not sure that the majority of them are in tune with that idea, the human development, the growth of the soul, I guess. And those ideas are certainly reflected in the liberal arts Catholic ideals that we have. Like our mission statement's quite unique, and I think it seems like that reflects on having more general goals about growth. Maybe in 20 years, hopefully, I'm not as bad with my anger. Like maybe that's
that would be wonderful. Versus, that would be terrific. Exactly, exactly. I mean, look, one of the things I like to say is, I can't remember who I stole this from, but I stole it from someone decades ago, that a real education shouldn't just be a 4-year education, but a 40-year education, right? It should be the kind of thing you carry with you for the rest of your life, right? So that when you're dealing with, not just about how to land the next big deal, but when you're dealing with the loss of a loved one, or when you're dealing with, watching raising children, you can draw on these inner resources that you've been given here at Assumption University, right, or at a great liberal arts school. And so it's with that end in mind, right? I mean, so I'm a political science professor, right? So one of the things that I can think of is, what kind of citizen am I helping to create? Now, not a Republican, not a Democrat. I want to make students who leave here, they're going to be informed, responsible, serious, sober citizens of this republic. And they're going to know what that word means, republic. And they're going to know why we should care about it and why we should preserve it. That's the view we have in mind. When you look at elementary school or high schools, so I guess I want to say two things here. We look at the current state of education in America today. A lot of these schools are driven by concerns with state accreditation agencies or regional accreditation agencies, and so they're designing curriculum with a view to these accreditation agencies. Yeah, they don't want to lose their accreditation. They need to keep their status as a publicly acceptable high school, whatever. That's going to have a give a degree that the state recognizes. But that accreditation agency doesn't have these things, the assumptions, mission about creating thoughtful citizens who are devoted to the common good and the search of truth in the company of friends. That's not what they're concerned with.
Sure.
Right? And so so you get this kind of what I would call a deforming influence by a lot of these accreditation agencies.
Because the business, right? The accreditation agency.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, so that's the one point I want to say. The other thing is, as a result of this, you're starting to see, I think, a long overdue reaction by you've seen a growth in the last 20 years of homeschooling. You're now seeing the rise of what they call classical education, schools dedicated to classical education, which are starting to pop up, which are trying to take back, right, classical education for their kids, education rightly understood for their children and our future citizens. And I mean, I think that's a very heartening development. Yeah.
We touched a little bit on some ideas that have been lost on some students, possibly, like reflecting on the liberal arts ideas we just talked about. Another thing I'm interested in, so I've never taken your class, and I wish I did. I wish I did so I could speak more intelligently about your class. But I'm kind of happy I didn't, because I've talked to people who have, and many different reviews. No, but it's very interesting to me. It's very interesting to me because it seems like and I'm not saying you're some impossibly challenging professor, but it seems like the more challenging the professor, more often than not, correlates with more knowledge that you have, the more potential that you can gain knowledge in that class, in those periods of class throughout the semester. Now, on the other hand, I think some students can be overwhelmed by like passion or excitement.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that dilemma you have? I'm sure you're passionate.
Oh boy, that's a tough one, right? Because I get naturally excited about this stuff. It's not a show for me. I'm not trying to whip the kids up into a frenzy. I love talking about this stuff, right? I mean, I one of the things I discovered when I was an undergraduate, when I was doing review sessions with my peers in the classes we were in, and I'd run review sessions, and I loved it, man. I loved it. I loved discussing this stuff and trying to find new and different ways to like convey a point to my peers. And so I'm just naturally excited about this. But you're right, it scares some students. They're overwhelmed by this kind of wave of intensity that's coming at them, right? And I'm always worried. I mean, so one of the problems with the excessive enthusiasm, or with my enthusiasm, is it either scares students or it becomes a sideshow for them, where it's like, watch the spaz in front of the room, and they're just like, wonder what he's going to do next. Is he going to throw a desk? Is he going to bang on the desk? What's he going to do? Instead of listening to what I'm actually saying, right? So there is this way in which it becomes counterproductive. And then, of course, the other thing is, it scares students. The fact of the matter is, I love what I do, but I also love the students, and I want what's best for them, right? I want them to grow, and that requires that I make demands of them, right? Because if we just say, do what you want, they're not going to grow. Just leave it to yourself, figure out your own way. It's not going to happen. And believe it or not, I think deep down, most students want to have a lot asked of them. They do. I mean, they're afraid. I think some students naturally, I think we all are at some point afraid of failing, right, or not being able to meet the demands. But deep down, I think we want our professors to ask more of us because we want them to think we're capable of doing it. Right? And I think they're capable of doing it, and I want them when they're done after 4 years here, and they walk across that dais on their graduation day, and they get that sheepskin. I want that to be worth something.
Right.
And
if they take on more challenges, it'll be worth something.
Absolutely,
for
absolutely.
Sure.
Look, I mean, so I'm going to pump political science a little bit here, but I know a lot of our majors will sometimes they love the major, and that's one of the things I do like at the end of the year, and we have our political science banquet, and we're talking to our seniors. I mean, they really love the major. They love their experience in it. But I think part of it's because it's been like boot camp, and you've made it through boot camp, and you made it through together, and there's a kind of esprit de corps that's there. But with that comes a lot of suffering, right? Xenophon Socrates says that true education requires suffering.
Right.
I think that's true, and so I'm here to give true education. That means suffering. and they'll sometimes lament, that education comes at the expense of a higher GPA, and they'll look around and they'll say, well, I know I see other people and they've got these really nice GPAs. They didn't have to work as hard as I did for this particular GPA. And I'll say, well, would you really want to change places with them? And then the answer is no. They wouldn't. They would rather have what they have and learned what they learned.
Right. But appreciation in that challenge, it seems like, okay, so those political science students who graduated, they understood it because they took it on and they embraced the challenge and then they moved forward. But there's so many students. I'm guessing there's more students now, my generation, than there were in your generation, who are just completely against challenge, and they think that the challenge is like a disservice to them, that you being challenging is actually you maybe being selfish or like something like that.
Or arrogant or elitist or
right.
Somehow I'm not a good teacher because I'm not giving them enough aid or support to allow them to succeed. And the fact of the matter is, look, I'll let other people be the judge of my ability as a professor, and certainly, there over the generations, students are going to change because things change, people change, society changes. Look, I'll just go back to the fact that I really do love my students, and sometimes that love is tough love, because I know if they can handle my classes. So I'll put it this way. I don't want to make too grandiose. I was about to make a really grandiose claim for myself. I won't do that. I'll just tell this one story. After my first couple years here, I had a couple of young men who had taken a lot of classes with me, and they had gone to law school, different law schools, but they were buddies. They went to law school, and after their first semester in law school, and the first year of law school is notoriously very difficult. Right. They contacted me and said, your exams were harder than these. Now, someone might say, well, you might want to dial it back, Professor Dobski.
A little bit.
But the fact of the matter is, they left Assumption, at that time it was Assumption College, they left Assumption College prepared to succeed in law school. That means we did our job.
For sure.
And now these men are out there making, this, like I say, was like about almost 20 years ago. They're making scads of money. I mean, please,
sure,
a lot more money than yours truly. They were ready to succeed. They didn't like the challenges at the time. I'm sure they had all sorts of choice words to describe me to others. But in the end, and it wasn't just me. It was everyone at the school, everyone in the department. They were as a result of this education prepared to succeed. But look, these 4 years here are there's a lot of transformation that goes on, right? Sometimes I'll tell students true education's like going through puberty, right? And it's awkward and weird and uncomfortable and exhilarating, at times exhilarating. And at the end of it, you're not the same person as when you began. Whenever you're a 12, 13, 14-year-old, at 19 or 20, you're a qualitatively different human being, right? And that's what true education should be. If you're fully educated or getting fully educated, you're going to be a different human being. But that growth can be painful. With growth comes some discomfort. Yeah, that's what it means to grow up and be an adult. Yeah.
And it's good that these challenges, they're like manufactured on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
And then we're able to, when you lose a loved one, that challenge is, not to say it's easy in any sense, but at least it gets a little, you might be able to deal with it better because you face just challenges.
Yeah, I mean, these are pretty, I know at the time when you're in college, and I don't mean to downplay the seriousness with which students have to deal with they've got a lot going on while they're here. It's not just classes, they've got jobs, personal lives, all sorts of things are going on at the same time. But it's much lower stakes, right, than when after you graduate, and you become hopefully a fully autonomous, self-governing human being who's now responsible for others. Perhaps you have a family, or others you're taking care of. Maybe it's parents or siblings. The stakes are raised there, and then it becomes much more serious. You need an opportunity here where the stakes are much lower, where you can learn, you can fail, you can fall down, and you can get back up.
Right.
Right. And it's okay. We're here to support you, right? If you fail at a particular assignment or a particular class, so, Assumption. That's one of the things I love about Assumption is we're here to support the students, right? We want them to succeed. It may seem adversarial, but at the bottom of it is we want you to succeed. We're here to help you succeed,
Right.
But that takes a kind of courage on the part of the student to be open to that. It means being open to criticism. It means being open to the possibility of failure, recognizing that possibility and going through it, facing it anyway. Means being open to saying, maybe I'm not cut out for this. This particular study, maybe it's another study I'm cut out for. But it requires being open to your own limits.
Right. Or maybe I'm not trying as hard as I
Maybe
could
I'm not trying as
And
hard.
that's-
Maybe I need to ask more of myself.
Right. That's what I found as a first year freshman. I just realized that I was probably giving 20% in high school. 20%. I thought I was giving 100. So now I think I'm giving like a larger percentage, but I'm still realizing that there's limits there, but also that I do have potential that I should care about and invest in.
And absolutely, think about it. Okay, so when you're in high school, you got your parents there, and they're kind of always there. They help you get up on time. Maybe they're not going to let you sleep in and miss school.
No.
They're going to be, hey, how are your studies going? Did you get your work in? All of these things, right? They're there, and you come to college, and you don't have that oversight. And it's very liberating. It's very freeing. It's very wonderful. And then, but it can be also kind of terrifying because you're like, I'm now responsible for myself. But once you realize you can start doing it on your own, oh my God, right? How liberating and how empowering is that? I mean, when you're a kid, all you want to do is be able to take care of yourself, not always having to depend on others. You just can't wait to be big.
Yeah.
And then you get here and you discover, I actually can do this. I can be autonomous. And when I do that, I can ask of myself a lot more, right? I can say, you know what, I'm going to get up and I'm going to put in that extra time to study, or I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to get that extra job, or whatever it is. And you say, I can do this. How unbelievably exhilarating is that? To discover you can own yourself and be a truly free human being.
Right.
That's right. I all the time I'm telling students, what is a liberal education, right? Liberal is at root. Its root is a Latin word, liber, and that's a root of our liberty. It's about freedom and education in and towards freedom. How wonderful is it to discover you're capable of being a genuinely free human being?
Right. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But it's not easy.
And you can stack things too. It's like you learn how to do one thing one year, you continue to do that, like going to the gym, for example. If you add going to the gym to your school week routine, you will be undoubtedly happier.
Oh, yeah.
You'll think you accomplish more, you will accomplish more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mentioned my daughters are at junior year in Providence now, and I was speaking to one of them the other day, and she said, first week of class, she's like, these classes look a lot harder than my sophomore year. I was like, well, that's right.
There you go.
Junior, senior year, it's stepping up, and I think she's nervous, but it's a healthy kind of nervousness.
Good.
Right? She's seeing the challenge in front of her. She recognizes it's a challenge, and she's hoping she's up for it. And I mean, I think that's good. That's you stack these things, right? You don't go in as a junior. You go in as a freshman, and you learn these skills, and then you build on that. You become a sophomore. You build on those skills, and then we step it up.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I have some other questions I thought about as far as like contemporary ideas. I haven't voted in a presidential election yet. So the first one I'm going to vote in is next year. So I was watching the presidential debates, or I watched the first presidential debate. My first question about like voting and being a young individual in a community. Why should I vote? I think a lot of people explain to me that my vote doesn't matter. Some do. Some say it does. But my parents tell me to vote every time I can. But like, does my vote really matter? Is voting the best way to participate in a?
Well, it's a great way to participate. It shouldn't be the only way that we participate. And that I think is a real problem, is that we tend to think of democratic participation simply in terms of elections. Elections are very important, but if that's all it is to being a free person, then we come out of our holes every 4 years to vote for a president, and then go back to our caves. No, I mean, so it should be much more than that. But on the issue of voting, I love voting. I love it. I get so excited to do it, and I would always take my daughters with me so they could see how excited I got about it. They could see how important they'd see the long lines, everyone's waiting, right? And then we'd get into the booth, and I'd show them what the ballot looks like, and then I'd point out, okay, we're going to vote for this candidate or that candidate, whatever. And they'd heard me talking about it enough because so they kind of knew going into it. But I love voting, and okay, so we have a system for when it comes to national presidential elections. It's determined by the Electoral College, and so a lot of people will say, in most states, 48 of the 50 states, it's winner take all. So
what are the two that are not winner take all?
I want to say Maine.
So they split electoral votes?
Well, so if you get 4 electoral votes, it's either Maine or New Hampshire, and then I think there's a western state that does it as well.
Okay.
One of the Dakotas. I should know this, and it's like on my fingertips.
You're good.
But you say you have 4 electoral votes in 2 districts, right? If a Democrat wins one district and the Republican wins the other district, they each get 1 electoral vote from that. But if you put it all together, and let's say the Democrat wins based on the state population as a whole, then they get the remaining 2. Okay. That's how they split it.
Okay.
Now so we have this electoral college system where it's each state is winner take all, and of course the representative of the electoral votes are based on the number of representatives from each state, so the number of House members and senators. In Massachusetts, if you're a Republican, I can't remember the last time Massachusetts cast its electoral ballots for a Republican presidential nominee or candidate. That means if you're a Republican in Massachusetts, you might think, I'm just throwing my vote away. It doesn't count here.
Yep.
Right? Same thing if you're, say, a Democrat in a long-standing red state, whether it's Florida or Oklahoma or Texas or something like that. You might say, well, it doesn't matter here because the state's going to go red anyway. I'm a big believer in the Electoral College. I think we should keep it. There are movements afoot to get around the Electoral College. We can talk about that if you want. But I cast votes here, and I haven't voted Democratic in a long time. I'm a registered independent, but I haven't voted Democratic in a long time. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm voting Republican.
Sure.
But I still vote. Why is that? Because my vote does count. My vote does count. It just doesn't count for the winner, right? My vote counts for a losing candidate.
Right.
Now, that's still important because it means I want people out there to know my vote here is no. I know this state's going to go Democratic. I don't give you my mandate, right? If I'm silent about this, how do they know I'm out there saying, I don't approve of this? They don't know that. The only way they know other people are out there that say, we don't approve of this, we know you're going to have it anyway, right? You guys got the numbers, is if they speak up and say, we know you got the numbers, but we're still going to be a loud minority here. We're going to make our voices known. I love casting votes of dissent. Right? Yeah. Because I say, okay, not me. Yeah, I know you're going to go this way, but not me. Okay. So the vote does count. It just counts for a non-winning candidate. Mm-hmm. So it would be no different than, if you have, imagine you have just another state where, a very popular candidate is running for governor, and you don't want to support that governor. Governor's very popular. He or she's very popular with most of the state. I don't like this governor. Does my vote still count? Sure. Right. I'm just voting against that governor. Right. And so it's important to know. And by the way, so if you're a Republican in Massachusetts or a Democrat in Oklahoma or Texas or Florida, it's important to those parties, nationally speaking, that they know you're there.
Right.
Because if they know you're there, they may next time around invest more resources into growing.
Right.
The non-majoritarian party.
Right. So if you think your vote doesn't count, then you also think your voice in the community doesn't
absolutely
count. That's
absolutely
not right.
So my voice let me try that again in English. My voice and vote does count. It just means I have a right to vote. I don't have a right to win. That's what I tell people when they're my vote doesn't. No, your vote does count. You just don't have a right to win. You have a right to a vote, but not a right to victory.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And victory you got to work for.
That's how it should be.
Yeah.
So Okay. What's like the other option? So there's the electoral college system that we have. What you're saying that there's some controversy about a different system?
Yeah,
Is there
there's a lot of people think in terms of our presidential election, we should run it by the popular vote, the national popular vote, right?
Okay.
So whoever gets the most votes, nationally speaking, just in terms of the popular vote, right, the people going out and casting ballots, should win the presidency. And there's a certain sense to that. It seems quintessentially democratic. It's not the way our system was set up.
That's right.
Right? Our system was set up so that the states would be the primary organizing forms for expressing
Right.
presidential preference. Okay.
But the bigger the state, the more power they have.
Yes, because
in
the
electoral
more
college.
the larger the population you have,
Right.
the more representatives you're going to have
Yep.
in from the House of Representatives. But they don't base the electoral count simply on the House of Representatives. Every state has 2 senators. And that actually changes quite a bit, right? Because when you add the senators into the mix, it narrows the gap between smaller states like, say, a New Hampshire or a Rhode Island and larger states like California and Texas. Now, it doesn't even it out, but
Right.
it narrows the gap.
Okay, even though everyone
narrows
gets
the
two, everyone gets two.
Everyone gets 2, but it changes the proportion.
Okay.
Right? It changes
right.
the proportion. So if you were to say, based on popular vote alone, one state gets 6 votes and another state gets 2 votes, you would say that the difference, it's 1/3, right? The smaller vote has 1/3 of the voice of the larger state. Now add 2 senators to each. What does it become? 8-4. Well, now we have 1/2
Yeah. Okay.
the voice of the larger. We're still a smaller voice,
Right. Marginally,
but the proportion has changed
for sure.
in our favor, in the smaller state's favor,
Okay, yeah,
right?
yeah.
We're making up more ground there just by adding 2 to everybody.
So the popular vote.
Yeah.
Why would you not think that's a good?
Well, there are many, many reasons, and we could do a whole hour podcast
bet,
on
yeah,
that
yeah.
alone. But to break it down, I'd say the first thing is if you do something like a popular vote, then I wish I had brought maps here if we were going to discuss this.
No, it's okay because
The
not that much time.
the Trump first Trump election beats Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
Well, Hillary got more
That's right.
more votes in the popular
That's right, yeah.
than Trump did, and there was something like, I don't know, several thousand counties right out there, and if you just break it down in counties, she won something like 500 counties. That means Trump won
Yeah.
several thousand counties.
Oh, yeah,
And she
yeah.
won 500.
Yeah.
Now she won the 500 most
Biggest
populous
ones. Okay. Yeah.
counties.
Okay.
And where would that be? Well, it would be L.A., it would be Miami, it would be New York, it would be Chicago, it would be Detroit, all very important cities. But that's a fraction of America.
Right.
And the interests of the big cities are not the same as the interests of the rest of the country. So if you eliminate the Electoral College, you could just say, look, all I need to do is win, L.A. County, New York,
Right.
Miami, D.C., Dallas, Fort Worth, stuff like that. That's it.
Definitely not what we want too.
And I don't have to bother going to Iowa or Indiana or New Hampshire. To hell with those places. I can ignore them because I just need the population center.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
The rest of America doesn't matter. The Electoral College means everyone's got to go to everywhere because all of them do matter.
Yeah.
And that's just the tip of the iceberg, right?
Right.
We could go back. There's another problem in all of this, and that is we might remember the Bush-Gore election, right? When it came down to counting votes in a particular county. And why were we trying to count votes in a particular Floridian county?
Came down to one county.
Came down to a couple counties in Florida.
Okay, yeah.
Why? Because Florida had all of these electoral votes that were in the balance, and whoever won Florida would tip the scales one
Right.
way or the other.
Right.
And so they were counting individual ballots in Broward County,
It's
right?
crunch time.
Now, if you have a national election and you eliminate electoral votes, and you have a very, very close election in terms of the popular vote, let's say within 1%, 2% of the vote,
Sure.
well, there could be all sorts of electoral irregularities throughout the country that could swing that percentage one way or the other. So you tell me we're gonna dig through 100 million votes
to then figure out
to figure out the winner.
right. Yeah, can't you just? It's not.
It would not be.
It wouldn't
We
work,
would.
right?
It would take years to unpack.
Okay.
And to say, no, and it would take years, not simply because you have to go back and recount each vote to make sure it was counted correctly, because then the lawsuits start, right? And the lawsuit,
back.
and it's going to take money. So I mean, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So the electoral college system makes it possible to say, look, the only way this person has a chance of winning is if they win that particular state. And if it's close in that state, then maybe we have a recount. And we got to do a recount. So let's look at the counties where it's close. Okay. So now we're just looking at a few counties instead of a nation of 350 million people.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm a big fan of the electoral college for many, many, many reasons.
Cool.
Yeah.
And it's good to know because it always was confusing to me as a young adult. Makes a little more sense now, but it's still confusing.
Yeah.
When I was watching the presidential debate, there's kind of a broad range of different individuals there, the Republican debate. And one person who kind of caught my ear, but I don't really know how to think about him or what he was saying, but he said, like, one idea he said was, since I'm the only one who's not bought and paid for, I can say this. And then he said something. And then it made me, people got very upset at him. It was Vivek, the Ramaswamy is his first? Is it? Okay, yeah. It interests me, but like, how do I navigate these kind of political controversies when I'm trying to get at some moderate view? Because that seems like that's where the truth is. But I mean, he seemed like he didn't think that we should pull troops out of Ukraine, and I think like, okay, well, yeah, we did spend a lot of money, but then isn't there like, shouldn't we be helping a country that needs help, right? So there's these different.
Yeah. Okay, so the Ukraine. I mean, so we go from one big topic to another.
Right. Well, we can focus on the first one. He said that. To be fair, he said that in response to the effects of the environment, the environmentalist claim.
Okay, so I'll say how old I am. I'm 50 years old now, and I've been at this for a while, and I don't claim to have any particularly keen insight on the nature of things, just from the experience of, I don't know how old you are, but I'll just say I'm 30 plus years older than you.
Yeah.
And I do not envy young voters today, young people today who are just starting to think about voting for major national elections, because it seems so incredibly convoluted. And by that I mean, you don't know any of these candidates personally, right?
No, of course
They're
not.
these vastly, there's this vast distance between us and them, not just in terms of miles, but in terms of kinds of experiences they have, wealth they have, you name it. There's just this world of difference between us and them. And so one of the chief ways we get to know them is through the news. When I was growing up, there were a couple major national newspapers, some major national journals, right? Then you would have your local state newspapers, something like that, big city newspapers, something like that. And that was a way that would really allow you to kind of distill discussion, right? It became possible to have discussion. Today, with social media and the print media basically dead, it's very hard to talk to people across or outside of your own particular ideas. It's even harder to get an accurate sense as to So I guess there's two things I want to focus on here, although we could talk about more than two things. One is the fragmentation of the media that's happened under the onset of digital news and social media. And the other one is what we've seen over the last couple of years, certainly since 2020, but it goes farther or older than that, is the extent to which the media has shown themselves to be not entirely trustworthy as being the objective purveyors of the news, right?
Elon Musk showed that quite evidently.
Yeah, well,
insane.
Elon Musk, and I would say, whatever you think about Elon Musk, you want to throw him aside, fine. Matt Taibbi. Now, Matt Taibbi is a journalist who now writes for Substack. He used to write for Rolling Stone. And he's written for a number of different outlets. He's a brilliant journalist. He and I do not agree politically, but he is one of the most honest, fearless journalists out there. And he was one of those when Musk took over Twitter, and Musk said, "All right, everyone, come in and take a look at what behind the curtain."
Right, what was going on?
Taibbi was one of the journalists to really lay bare what was going on there, and it's not just so you see government interference, but it's on both sides of the aisle, right? I think in because the Democrats have been recently in power, we saw more of that with them.
Okay,
but take your pick, right? I mean, it's not a partisan issue here. Everyone's got their hands dirty here, and so you see certain outlets simply being the kind of the organ grinder for a particular party, right? The voice box for a particular party, and so you're like, well, who can I trust, right? And then what happens is you've got this fragmentation on social media, the digital news. It's very easy to just get into an echo chamber of your own. You just, especially the way social, like something like Twitter and the algorithms, right. Twitter and Facebook work. They're just going to keep feeding you what they think you're interested in based on what you've been clicking on. So to come back to the question you asked, what would you say to young people trying to figure out? Yeah. He says he's not bought and paid for. Maybe. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know, Vivek. Maybe he's bought and paid for. I don't know. So I really, really feel for young people today trying to figure this out. What I do, and it's not foolproof by any means, but I try and read as much as I can across the spectrum. Okay? So one of the things I like to do, and this is going to be another plug for political science, but also for assumption. There's a website out there called realclearpolitics.com. And it's published by an Assumption alum who was a political science major. His name is David DeRozier. And he just makes this available. Realclearpolitics.com, and they're not pushing any particular view. They're simply a clearinghouse for the best that's been published on any given day. Okay. From the right, the left, the crazy, wingnut, whatever. It's all there. It's all there. And by the way, I tell my students all the time to use Real Clear during election cycles because they have links to the best surveys and polls out there. So you want to follow an election, they're the place to go because they have everything. Because they're not Republican, they're not Democrat, they're not Libertarian, they're not anything. They literally will just post everything that's been published. And I'll go and read. I'll know, okay, well, this was a conservative voice. This is a liberal voice. This is a libertarian voice. This is a, moderate voice. This is, this one might be a little out there, but what the hell? And I try and read it all. As much as I can, as I can. I try to read every side as much as possible and then make an informed decision, knowing full well that I'm never going to have 100% perfect objective clarity on any given issue.
But that's the move. You're getting information from both sides. You mentioned the algorithms that are in place on social media. Like, it's really bad because not only are those views being reinforced because of the Instagram algorithms, for example, but they're kind of uneducated views. Oh yeah. Like they're not even educated on their own side that they're kind of identifying with or scrolling through. So. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, I've got my guilty pleasures that there are columnists out there I like reading. Taibbi is one. I mean, even though he and I don't agree politically, I love the work he's doing. But I've got my guilty pleasures. But I always have to kind of try and be honest with myself. I need to go read this. I need to go read from this particular resource because I know they're going to give me something I don't agree with. But I need to think about it like that, and it's hard work. I mean, if anyone's listening to this, they go, "Well, that's a lot of work to do." Yeah. Well, making responsible decisions in one of the most powerful countries in the history of the world is a lot of work. It's a big responsibility. Yeah,
you wouldn't want it to be easier.
Exactly. Guess, right? Yeah. So that's, I wish I had a panacea for you or something that was simpler, but really it's just you got to do a lot of work. What is it? Kind of you have to kind of have a respectful disrespect for everything. I'm going to take you seriously, but I'm not simply going to believe you.
Like skepticism and
healthy skepticism. That's a better way to put it. A healthy skepticism.
Good.
Without being cynical. That's the other thing I fear is that students may very quickly give in to cynicism, and that's not good because if you are genuinely cynical.
What is cynicism?
Well, to simply say it's all a game. It's all it's all about. It's all rigged. doesn't matter what I say. It's not about just. It's all about power. It's all about money. Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's about power, and money certainly has a role in these things, and sometimes it ought to. But I've studied politics as a professor and just as a interested citizen long enough to know that most of the people involved in the world of politics are not primarily motivated by a desire for power or by a desire for money, but by a love of the common good. Even people I don't like. You know, there's a candidate out there who's very popular with certain people, who is not president. Just so I'm not, people don't think I'm talking about Trump, but who's very popular.
Who was never a president?
He was never president.
Okay.
He ran for and I don't agree with any of his policies. I think they're horribly misguided, but I think he genuinely believes them, and he genuinely believes that they would help our country. I have a great deal of respect for that. And I think it's true of a lot of the people involved. Maybe not always at the highest level or the most visible level, but most people involved in politics get involved because they love our country and they want to see it thrive. And so I encourage young people not just be like, oh, to heck with it. It's all rigged. There's nothing I can do. It's all about moneyed interest. It's all about the elite. We can't change anything. No, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right.
You can change it. It's not all about power or money. Justice does matter. Rights do matter. Freedom does matter. Equality does matter. But we have to make sure it matters to our politicians precisely to the extent that we get involved in political life, actively get involved in political life. Because otherwise, then we'll just be surrendering our voices to them, and we'll become pawns in their game.
I'm not sure if this is the individual you were referencing, but Robert F. Kennedy, I noticed him on the left side, and he really stuck out to me because he seemed to have views that he believed in, and he spoke about the truth, which you don't really, which for some reason you don't hear presidents say, reference, or that there's these ideas that we can pursue that we don't, and it seems like the Democratic Party kind of just shoot him away a little bit. I know that some people think he's kind of absurd, but
the first Trump election in 2016, boy, years go by quickly.
Yeah, right. Jeez.
It looked like for a while it was going to be Trump versus Bernie Sanders. And had the Democratic primaries not been set up the way they were, it's quite possible that Sanders would have been the nominee,
and then
and
the president,
not
possibly,
Clinton.
right?
Well, yeah, and maybe president. I mean, because one of the fascinating things was there were a lot of people who liked Sanders, who ended up voting for Trump, and why they liked Sanders was not because he was a Democrat, but because he was anti-establishment. Right, because people believed him when he said, I believe X, Y, and Z. They're like, he's authentic. This guy believes what he says. He's not lying to us. He's not telling us what we think, what he thinks we want to hear. He believes in these principles, and he's going to break up the system, and he's going to really, tend to the needs of the common man in a way that both parties have just kind of forgotten about. And so when he didn't get the nomination, they were like, well, Trump's just the flip side of that coin, He also says things he believes, and he also comes across as someone who's going to address the needs of an America that's been forgotten by the two major political parties. So it wasn't entirely. I mean, at first when I first heard about this phenomenon of Bernie Bros voting for Trump, I was like, what?
Yeah.
But after a moment's reflection, I mean, they were both outsider candidates. Both were held to be authentic. Say what you want about Trump, he doesn't seem to need to lie.
Yeah,
right. He'll tell you what he's thinking. He'll tweet it, whether you want to hear it or not, whether you should say it or not. He says it, and people are like, well, thank God we're finally getting straight talk from somebody.
Right, and that might influence someone to kind of make up for some of the negative things that people think about Trump, but still be authentic or still say what they think. So it could end up being certainly a good thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, look. People say you're a political scientist, so you should know what's going to happen in a particular election or current events. Just look, my track record. If I'm 500, I would be lucky.
Oh wow.
It's very, very hard to predict these things, but I wouldn't count out RFK Jr. at all. I would not count him out.
Really?
You know, I know he would be running against an incumbent president, but you know, look, crazier things have happened.
Yeah.
We've seen it,
Right.
and you know, I mean, I know conservative-minded people who really like RFK,
Oh, for sure.
and so I would not be surprised. You know,
Have you listened? Sorry.
it's in the realm. I would say this. A little surprised, maybe, but it's not outside of the realm of a possibility, and we
enough,
shouldn't
yeah.
discount it at all. And if there are people out there who like RFK, they shouldn't think, oh, well, my vote doesn't count.
Yeah, yeah.
I won't support him.
Right,
No,
no.
You cast your vote of dissent. Express that vote of dissent.
Have you seen? I'm sure you're familiar with Joe Rogan. Have you seen any of his podcasts, particularly the one with RFK?
I've seen clips from that episode,
Okay.
but I haven't watched the whole.
They talk about astonishing things. I mean, RFK in the first about 35 to 40 minutes breaks down the history of vaccines, starting all the way back to 1920, and that there's a lot of. I'm not going to use the word corruption because it's hard to say if that's what it was or that's what the intent was, but there's a lot of things that happened about that science that we didn't know. In particular, they were trying to figure out where the mercury in the vaccines were going, and the mercury from the. So how they did it? They did a controlled study with children, and they gave them fish that had mercury in it. I think tuna, that's what it was.
Yeah.
And they tested their blood after a week and after a month, and all of the mercury was secreted, like gone from their system, from their blood. So they figured that these are safe vaccines, right? And that's what was established a long time ago. But what a scientist did that same study, but with monkeys or with chimpanzees, and what you can't do with children, but what you can do with chimpanzees is sacrifice them. And he found that the mercury was found in their brain, so because he knew it went somewhere, and then there was a whole interesting kind of controversy that arose in 1980s, I'm not sure when, but in the 1980s, where these pharmaceutical companies went to the Reagan administration and basically said, like, we're going to lose all of our money because we're getting sued for the vaccines, and the vaccines are beneficial, but they're also slightly dangerous. Like, they're inherently dangerous because they're vaccines.
Yeah.
And I didn't know any of that. It didn't like drastically change my view on vaccines. I wasn't planning on getting another vaccine before I watched it, and I'm still not going to now after watching it. But I think it's just helpful to understand, especially something you're putting in your body.
Well, no, that's right. So America, and maybe just generally people in the West, have this this ability. How do I want to put it? They fetishize expertise, right? If you're an expert in something, then we should just simply defer to you, as if somehow all political life could be reducible to being run by the experts, right? So when it comes to economics, let's get our Nobel Prize winning economists in there. They'll run the economy and they'll get it right. When it comes to making health policy, let's get our health experts in there and they'll make it right. You know, and when a pandemic pops up, we got to trust the science, right? We got to trust. We hear this all, trust the science, which is a very strange thing to say. You got to trust the science. Science precisely takes trust. Try to say, let's take it out of the equation here.
Okay.
Don't trust me. I'll show you.
Yeah,
I'll
that's right.
demonstrate
That's what
it
science
to you.
is.
There's no trust needed here, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, so this bit about trust the science has always been very
That's
kind of ironic, unintentionally ironic. But the thing is, anyone who knows anything about how science works is you start off with a hypothesis and you see if it holds up. You do some experiments, see if it holds up, and a lot of times it doesn't. You go back, you change your hypothesis, play with things a bit. You know, I'm being very crude here, simplistic, right? But we build scientific knowledge over trial and error, and it takes a long time to do this, right? So I was not at all surprised when, you know, after the pandemic broke out and the scientific community starts saying X on one thing and then later starts massaging it, changing it, modifying it. That was perfectly understandable, perfectly predictable.
Right.
What bothered me from the beginning is the way people said, just trust the science. No.
Right, with certainty. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the science is going to change. We should take this with a grain of salt. Okay, this is the first start. Maybe it's right, but we don't know, right? Like you said, you know, they discovered what was it? The mercury was in their brains, not in the blood, but it's collecting in the brain. It had to go somewhere, right? They discover this later. All right, this is going to happen. This doesn't mean we go, don't trust the scientists.
Right.
It means, no, we need to put science, have a kind of proper, healthy caution or modest caution with respect to scientific discoveries, right? Because they change over time.
That's a good explanation. And then per my example, it's like, doesn't mean don't get any vaccine.
Right.
So you don't want measles or whatever.
No polio. Thank you very much. Keep the polio
We'll
away.
take the polio vaccine.
Yeah.
But understanding it and then following science seems like the good thing to do.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean, if you express, kind of healthy skepticism about what science can do, that doesn't make you a fascist. It doesn't make you a doomsday prepper.
Yeah.
It just makes you someone who knows something a little bit about the way scientific discoveries work,
Yeah.
and they change over time. And you say, okay, well, especially given what's at stake in some of the vaccines that are out there, you might say, don't know if I want to put this in my body or in the body of others.
Right.
No, I'm not saying I'm not a principled anti-vaxxer or anything like that, but I got the jab, when it first came out. I probably would going back, if I had to do it over again, I probably would have done it again. But
the jab. What do you mean?
This flippant way of referring to when the COVID vaccine first came out, and they were, okay, get your Moderna shot, get your Pfizer shot, get your Johnson Johnson. They were calling it the jab.
Oh,
okay.
Okay, gotcha.
Little needle shot. But at the same time, for those who didn't want to get it, I saw no need to demonize them.
Sure. So yeah, we have a interesting political race coming up. So I'm excited to follow it over the next year, especially with at least a little more knowledge on political societies in general and ours more. So I think you've explained a ton of good ideas too about, and this is an idea that President Wiener definitely agrees with, ideas of prudence and patience and kindness. Like those are the most important ideas, I think, in political communities. Not if you're right or wrong. That seems like that can just get resentful and bad. So.
Yeah, and I know we have to wrap up, but
Sure.
It's a truism, but giving people the benefit of the doubt goes a long way, right? That doesn't mean agree with them. It doesn't mean accept all of their points, but you could, it makes civil disagreement a lot much easier if you begin by assuming they're not operating from bad motives or bad intentions. They might be wrong, right? Okay. They might make mistakes. Their views might be filled with errors. But that doesn't mean it's coming from a bad place. And if we can just begin by cultivating that a little more, that just the ability to give the person you're talking to the benefit of the doubt. I'm not going to assume you're trying to be a bad person here, or that you're operating from malign intentions. I mentioned that candidate who I disagree with. I don't think that candidate was operating from malign intentions. I think he genuinely loves the United States of America.
Yep.
He just has a different understanding of the common good than I do. We disagree widely about it, but I think he genuinely loves America and its citizens. I'm able, were I ever to meet him, I think I'd be able to have a very sober and humane, passionate disagreement with him, but it would be respectful.
Sure.
And I think that's just it. If we could just start with that, it would be a lot easier for us to talk to one another. Right? That you can't have a free society with many different views and celebrate diversity as we want to, that's capable of deliberating together without that. Right?
Right.
Free people with diverse views need to be able to come together and manufacture consent in some way, but that requires deliberating together, and deliberating together can only work if we give each other the benefit of the doubt.
That's great, Professor. We appreciate you coming on here.
My pleasure. This is fun.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabe.